Hi, I'm Hazel, and welcome to the last days before the Shadowlands pre-patch. It is almost here. It is Saturday today, which makes it time to sit down and catch up on the WoW news of the week, what I've been up to, and answer some of your questions. This week we had a whole dust-up, a hullabaloo, a kerfuffle, if you will, over Covenant abilities and whether they should be used outside of Shadowlands zones. So this week we got official pre-patch notes and a beta update, and in the initial beta update, Covenant abilities were not usable outside of the Shadowlands. There was a specific error message that said you must be in the Shadowlands to use this. It was a very intentional change. This generated an outpouring of feedback in direct opposition to this, and they did decide to revert that decision. So you will now in Shadowlands be able to use your Covenant abilities anywhere you want. New content, old content, doesn't matter. And then at the end of Shadowlands, it is exceedingly likely that they're going to just turn them off when the expansion ends, but that becomes a later us problem. Overall, this works out to be a bit of a non-piece of news because something theoretically was going to happen and then ended up not happening before anything actually happened, before the game came out. So this was just a thought experiment, really. So in the reversion post, Ian mentioned that one of the reasons they had explored restricting it in the first place, which they're not going to do, but one of the reasons they thought about it was because they thought it would be weird to see someone summon Swolkin hanging out in Orgrimmar, like world fantasy reasons, and mainly as a way to keep expansion-specific systems more grounded in their expansion from the outset, for a few reasons, but one of them being to make it feel less strange when the expansion ends and they then take it away. When I read that post, I thought it was a bit odd because neither of those reasons had really occurred to me, but when I first heard they were thinking of restricting it, I thought it was so that I wouldn't need to consider whether a character was like mostly going to farm old content when picking their covenants. If I'm allowed to use my covenant abilities anywhere, it feels like on any character that is not like a combat main, I am almost certainly going to take Night Fae or Venthyr because they have the mobility covenant abilities. Soul Shape in particular is a great sprint that will be really nice to have in old raids, and it would feel kind of awkward to not take that, especially on a character that you're probably not going to raid on anyways. So assuming that I can use covenant abilities everywhere, which seems to be the case, I'm probably going to end up with one character for each of the 3 non-Night Fae covenants, and then like 17 Night Fae characters just so that they can soul shape in old raids. But that is just what it's going to be. Like I said, the whole thing's kind of a non-issue because it got reverted before it eventually went in, but it did kind of reignite the conversation around borrowed power and how much borrowed power is good for the game, or should the game have any borrowed power at all. For this context, if you're new to the term, borrowed power usually means combat power or abilities that are not directly from your class, but they're from like an expansion specific mechanic or an item or like a set bonus, that kind of thing that's not like tied to your character and your class necessarily. So I think I've stated this before, but I am generally pro borrowed power because I don't really like the alternatives. I feel like borrowed power is a great way for them to continue adding new abilities every expansion without just kind of adding more abilities onto our base classes the way they used to and having them get more and more and more and more bloated and then eventually pruning them down, and nobody likes that. I didn't like that situation. So with borrowed power, they're able to not only add new things every expansion with the expectation that they're limited time, but also try riskier things and wackier things. Because if they do make something that's a little bit too much, they haven't broken the entire game, and even if they can't reasonably fix it, it's at least a limited duration thing, right? Like, so they're able to take more risks and do more cool things because they don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to break World of Warcraft forever with a new mechanic. It also lets them add more intensely themed abilities to each expansion, so you feel like you're really doing Shadowlandsy and indeed Covenanty stuff in the Shadowlands without having that be like a weird dated thing to manage later. So I overall quite like borrowed power, but I do think it can go too far. For example, there were several moments in BFA where my borrowed power, like my essences and my corruptions, were vastly out damaging my Shadow Priest powers. And while I might be pulling really great numbers in a dungeon or a raid, it felt less like I was doing that as a great Shadow Priest and more like I was doing that as a person with focused Azerite beam who knew when to fire it. So I do think that borrowed power should never really be like most or all of what you're doing. I feel like 30% is a good limit of, if more than a third of your damage is coming from something that's not even yours, that feels like too much. I don't know if that's the right number, but there should be a number, right? That's not like 90. And I also think that sometimes there's a few too many concurrent borrowed power systems going on. I didn't need to have Azerite powers at the same time as my Azerite essences at the same time as my corruptions, and hopefully in Shadowlands they're just front loading all the systems at the beginning and they won't add any more later. But even so, I already feel like the Shadowlands legendaries and the Covenant abilities and all the Soulbind abilities are kind of a lot to contend with, and I don't know if they needed all of them. It feels like a lot going on at once, but at least this time most of them are feeding into things your class does as opposed to just having you kill things with Twilight Devastation. One example of borrowed power that I think was more favorably received in the past was tier sets. Tier set bonuses have always been a limited duration type of extra power that you would get, like extra abilities and combos and bonuses you would get access to, and it was very well understood that they were only for that tier, and then you would replace them at the end of the tier with a new tier set and then at the end of the expansion. And those always felt pretty decent to collect and wear. I think the worst part about them was kind of by Legion when you were juggling them with other pieces of gear that you wanted to wear for set bonuses and just keeping too much stuff in your bags, but the general concept of the bonuses themselves was fun. So I do think borrowed power can work. I think they go a little far with it sometimes, but I don't think that getting rid of it completely is the answer. Other things that happened in the patch notes, we found out that water will take a few seconds to kick up to full mana regenerating speed when you drink in Shadowlands. That seems like a thing that is specifically targeted at arena healers to reduce the viability of sneaking like mini drinks within a fight. Like if you're going to get a viable drink, you need to be sure it's a long one. Although that does also seem like it's going to kind of annoy a bunch of people that drink in dungeons, because whenever I'm healing mythic dungeons, I often find myself drinking for just like 5 seconds between pulls while my tank is running to the next thing just to keep myself topped up. And that's going to be a lot harder with this change, so that's something. They also said the Black Market Auction House is now going to be only available to max level characters with the pre-patch, which is presumably to kind of reduce the viability of like off-realm snipers camping low population Black Market Auction Houses to try to get cheap items and like move gold around. That one doesn't upset me too much just because I didn't do that. And then we also found out this week about conduit swapping switching to an energy-based system instead of just like a weekly cooldown, so that as you're getting more and more new conduits, you can kind of swap them around a little more often to try them out and then figure out what kind of builds you're going to use. As far as what I've been up to this week, I had a little bit more shading done on my tattoo, so I am freshly, shinily bandaged, but I have a little more of this filled in. We have a lot more work to do. I don't think it's going to be done until like January or so, but I'm really happy with it so far. In WoW, I have been just going mad trying to keep one thought in my head at a time as I dart from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing with all the things. I finished my Paragon of Argus achievement and got my Hazel the Lightbringer title, which I'm kind of ashamed I didn't get that sooner as a player on the Lightbringer server, but better late than never. And I'm just really excited about Prepatch. I want to level characters. I think I want to level a Draenei priest, and then, like I mentioned before, kind of target zones that have transmog that I need. And I know I'm missing some stuff from Blood Mist Isle and Azure Mist in particular, so just kind of like poking around the Draenei questing zones to level up 10 to 50 or, 10 to 15 or however long it takes to get that gear in pre-patch, and, filling us some transmog and making yet another priest that I can use to farm yet more priest transmog. It's a bit of an obsession, but I'm having fun. Questions for this week. Shenanigans asks, when will BFA no longer be a requirement to pre-purchase Shadowlands? Pre-patch. BFA is getting rolled into the base sub with the Shadowlands pre-patch, so anybody that has not bought BFA yet should be able to just buy Shadowlands, and you should be able to access BFA stuff even if you never bought it, because it's getting kind of rolled into the base sub fee. That is happening very soon with this week's reset. Sandy asks, have heard through the grapevine that Twitch will no longer have add-ons for WoW. Is this true? And if so, where would we be getting updates for current and future add-ons? So this is true. Twitch has sold CurseForge to Overwolf, and Overwolf is going to be launching their own dedicated app on October the 20th. So well ahead of this change, I had been hearing some differing opinions about Overwolf, and I decided to kind of feel out my options. I've been using WoWup for a couple of weeks now. I got that from wowup.io. It is a free open source add-on updater that is available for Windows, but not macOS just yet. The Mac version I hear is coming. And that's been really good. It is nice and clean. It doesn't appear to have any advertisements. It is effective. There was no painful transition period or anything. My settings are all exactly the same. I didn't have to like port everything over. It just kind of scanned my folders and found my add-ons, and that was that. So that's what I've been using. I've been happy with it. I've heard good things about other options as well, but I would just kind of encourage you to take a look through what your friends are using and give something a try. And Elijah asks, will the Nyalotha Allseer and Glacial Mount drops be reduced during the pre-patch or during the full patch? So this one was kind of unclear for a little bit. It was confused by the pre-patch survival video that Blizzard put out, but they've officially confirmed now that the Nyalotha Allseer and the Glacial Tidestorm drop rates will not be reducing until Shadowlands launch. They will remain 100% drops through pre-patch. However, they may be more difficult to get after pre-patch lands because, of course, our corruptions are all evaporating, our levels are being squished, our gear is being squished, and while the world is being squished along with us, and Ny'alotha in particular is going to receive some nerfs to compensate, it may or may not be as easy as it once was to get through those raids. So that has been my week. Thank you very much for watching. If you have a question you would like me to answer in a news video, please leave it in the comments of the most recent one and include the word question. Have fun in the pre-patch and have a wonderful, wonderful day.